Welcome. Today we're diving into a fundamental principle of chaos theory, Feigenbaum universality, and what happens when you break it. We're going to look at a mathematical system where a universal, totally predictable landmark doesn't just get nudged or distorted, it completely vanishes. It's a real case of destruction, not just displacement.
So in these really well-behaved mathematical systems, we call them one-dimensional analytic maps, the transition into chaos isn't just a random mess. It actually follows this beautiful, universal pattern that's governed by the Feigenbaum constant. And if we look at this system in a special way, in what's called the Borel plane, this universality shows up as a super sharp predictable feature. It's a singularity, kind of like a single steep peak on a map. You can think of it as this fundamental landmark. It's always supposed to be there. It's a cornerstone of the whole theory.
But here's the big question that's driving our whole investigation today. What happens to that landmark if we start to break the rules? What if we introduce a small, non-analytic disruption? Something that depends chaotically on the imaginary part of our complex variable. Does that landmark just get kind of pushed to a new location, or does it get wiped off the map entirely? So, how are we going to solve this? Well, here's the game plan. We'll start by defining the system and that universal landmark we're talking about. Then we'll introduce the very specific tweak that causes all the disruption. After that, we'll uncover the actual mathematical mechanism of destruction, look at the hard numerical evidence, and finally, put all the pieces of the puzzle together.
All right, first things first, let's get acquainted with our key player here, the system where this whole mystery unfolds.
So this is it, the non-holomorphic bird map. Now, it looks pretty similar to standard maps, but there is one crucial twist. See that multiplier, the thing that scales our variable at each step? It depends on the imaginary part of that variable, and that's what makes the whole system non-holomorphic. It means it's not differentiable in the complex plane in the nice, neat way that well-behaved functions are supposed to be. It basically breaks the rules of complex analysis, and that's the key to this whole mystery.
Now, this map has a really special property that was established in some earlier work. It's called the decoupling lemma. What it means is that the evolution of the imaginary part, the yn, is totally independent of the real part, xn. It's its own autonomous system. And as soon as you introduce that non-holomorphic term, this y-orbit just becomes chaotic. It then acts as a chaotic driver for the real part's orbit. So you've got this one-way street, y drives x, and that is the source of the disruption we're here to study.
Okay, so what's really fascinating here is that a ton of work has already been done on this. A whole series of papers, numbers 19 through 25, created this incredibly detailed atlas of the Borel plane just for this map. They used 6 different methods to hunt for the Feigenbaum singularity, and you know what they found? Nothing. The verdict was unanimous. It just wasn't there. It wasn't shifted somewhere else, it was completely gone. So our job today isn't to find it, it's to explain why it's gone. So if the landmark is missing, what made it disappear? Let's take a closer look at the precise mathematical mechanism that gets introduced by this non-holomorphic term.
We can actually model this little tweak really precisely. We can set our function g of y to be 1 plus epsilon h of y. Here, epsilon, or epsilon, is just a small number that lets us control how strong that non-holomorphic effect is. So when epsilon is 0, we're right back in the standard holomorphic world where g of y is just 1. But as we start to increase epsilon, we're basically turning up the dial on the chaos.
And this tweak, which seems so small, right, just controlled by this little epsilon, it has this massive consequence on the underlying math that actually creates the singularity in the first place.
This slide really gets to the heart of the whole idea. In the standard holomorphic case, the coefficients that build up our function, they grow geometrically. Think pure exponential growth. This super rapid, predictable growth is exactly what creates that sharp pole. But the moment we introduce that non-holomorphic term, the chaotic orbit of the imaginary part adds a correction. And here's the kicker. This correction term grows only linearly, way slower than that original geometric growth.
So here's the crucial point. That slower linear growth from the correction term effectively cancels out the fast geometric growth that created the pole. To first order an epsilon, the pole is just erased. The singularity isn't moved, you see. It's actively destroyed by this chaotic modulation.
Okay, so that's the theory. And it's pretty elegant, right? But does it actually hold up when we run the numbers? Let's take a look at the computational evidence for this destruction mechanism.
First things first, we need a baseline. We have to make sure our tools are actually working. And yeah, they are.
When we set epsilon to exactly 0, the pure holomorphic case, our computational probes find that Feigenbaum pole with machine precision. We're talking down to about 10 to the minus 16. It's exactly where it's supposed to be. Perfect.
All right, now watch what happens when we introduce even the tiniest perturbation. This plot shows the distance from where we expect the pole to be as we increase epsilon. See on the far left where epsilon is 0? The distance is 0. The pole is right on target. But look at the very next point. With an epsilon of just 10 to the minus 10, that's incredibly small. The distance jumps to over 73 units. The pole doesn't just drift away, it just disappears from its expected location instantly.
We can look at this another way too. This graph shows a proxy for the underlying growth rate of the system's coefficients. It's what we call its exponential type. In the holomorphic case, over on the left, it's about 141. But for any epsilon greater than 0, it just collapses to about 0.094. That is a drop by a factor of over 1,500. This is just a huge confirmation of our theory. The fundamental nature of the system has completely changed. It no longer has that exponential growth that's tied to the Feigenbaum constant. And honestly, this visualization says it all. These are heat maps of the Borel plane. In the top left, with epsilon at 0, you see that bright, sharp, concentrated signal right where the Feigenbaum singularity ought to be. Now look at the other panels. For any epsilon greater than 0, even a teeny tiny one, that sharp signal is immediately smeared out into this diffuse, featureless cloud. The landmark is just gone.
Now we have to be super precise here, just like the paper is. What we're seeing is what they call sharp destruction at Pade resolution. What this means is that our numerical methods, which are finite, they see this clean, sharp jump, a discontinuity. The second epsilon is not 0. This is incredibly powerful evidence, but it's not quite a full mathematical proof that holds for absolutely all conditions. It's the truth as seen through the lens of our best computational tools.
Okay, so let's pull all of these threads together and really understand what this means, both for this series of papers and for the bigger picture of universality.
This table lays it all out really nicely. The first 18 papers, they confirmed the pole was present in all sorts of holomorphic systems. Then, papers 19 to 25 did that exhaustive search in the non-holomorphic case and came up empty. Paper 26, the one we're talking about today, provides the why. It gives us the analytic destruction mechanism that explains why they found nothing.
So the verdict is pretty clear. The theory and the evidence, they just align perfectly. The analytic mechanism, the one based on that sub-exponential correction term, it gives us a complete explanation for the numerical results we see in that epsilon sweep. The case of the missing singularity is officially closed.
But the story isn't quite finished yet. The next planned paper in the series is actually aiming to take this a step further. The goal is to upgrade the argument from a perturbative sketch to a fully rigorous quantitative statement, using something called Lyapunov bounds. That would remove the need for that at Pade resolution caveat entirely.
So if you had to boil this all down to one sentence, what's the big takeaway? It's this: non-holomorphicity kills the Feigenbaum singularity. And it does it because the chaotic modulation, which is driven by the imaginary part of the system, it breaks the very geometric recursion, that clean exponential growth that's responsible for creating the pole in the first place. It really shows that a fundamental feature of universality can be surprisingly fragile. And this leaves us with a really fascinating and maybe a little unsettling final question. I mean, the Feigenbaum constant is a bedrock principle of chaos theory. If it can be so completely erased by introducing a type of complexity that's pretty common in real-world systems, well, where else might our standard clean models of physics and mathematics be incomplete? What other universal laws might just be overturned when we decide to look a little closer?